When the chips are down, when the future of mutant society is uncertain and the agents of Orchis are on the rise, will it be MADELYNE Pryor, the Goblin Queen, who ends up being a light in these dark times? Well, let's hop into the pages of Dark X-Men issue number 1 and find out together, shall we? Alrighty then, so this brand new team book, courtesy of Steve Fox, once again has us checking in with MADELYNE Pryor. For those who don't remember the finale of the abysmal Dark Web crossover event, the Goblin Queen had actually turned over a new leaf thanks to Jean Grey actually sharing a lot of important memories with her, allowing her to feel more like a full person and not just an evil clone. The X-Men also just kind of forgave her newest attempt at conquering the Earth, so because of that she was allowed to take a small piece of Limbo and start an actual real-deal Limbo Embassy on American soil. Which actually ended up being one hell of a blessing in disguise, as right now Orchis is actually forced by the American government to honor all treaties, meaning that the mutants that MADELYNE and her longtime love interest HAVOK take in are actually safe. Well, for the time being anyway. Let's talk about Alex for a second. Dude simped so hard he actually missed the new mutant massacre at the Hellfire Gala. Honestly, good for him. He's been through so much recently he could use a W even if this is how he gets it. As we learned, the Goblin Queen and the Limbo Embassy had actually been taken in wayward mutants who ruffled the feathers of Krakoa long before the actual fall of the island nation itself. Meaning we get a lot of weirdos and anti-heroes walking around. There's characters you'll know, like Azazel and M-Plate, and there's some even deeper cuts too. Now, it's here where the story actually gets really interesting. You see, when Jean Grey died on the island, she ended up sending out a psychic pulse that only other psychics could hear, including MADELYNE herself, because, well, she's a clone of Jean. But as MADELYNE explains to HAVOK, it was only Jean's death that MADELYNE was able to hear, meaning that all those other mutants who disappeared through those portals and are seemingly dead aren't dead at all. Which, actually, this knowledge puts the Goblin Queen in a really interesting position, especially when compared to Kitty Pryde and the Uncanny Avengers and all the other X-Men teams running around right now. She actually knows the truth. MADELYNE also vows to make good on her newfound second chance by tracking all of these lost, wayward, and hunted mutants at any cost, and to do this she's even managed to make her own magical version of Cerebro. She calls it the Mercy Crown. Now, one of these mutants who is currently on the run from the agents of Orchis turns out to be none other than Carmen Cruz. You might remember her if you read that very short-lived Children of the Atom book about those teens who pretended to be mutants. Now, I never actually finished that series, but apparently at the end of that one, we discovered that Carmen, mutant named GIMMICK, wasn't actually pretending at all, and she was the only real deal. Carmen ends up getting betrayed by one of her friend's dads, who drops a dime on her to Orchis, meaning that their house gets rushed by a bunch of heavily armed goons. Carmen gets arrested and dragged off to a mutant re-education facility, which, as we've seen from a bunch of the other X-Men books, is just a fancy way of saying mutant gulag for prisoners with interesting powers. GIMMICK actually proves to be quite resourceful for a mutant her age, and she probably would have been able to break herself out were it not for at that very moment her prison convoy ends up coming under attack by familiar faces Gambit, Maggot, and Archangel, who seem to be acting as their own little private mutant rebel cell right now, independent of what Kitty Pryde and Sync and all the others are doing. Now, this really should have been a simplistic prisoner snatch and grab, but unfortunately these Orchis grunts actually have one hell of an ace up their sleeve, Albert, aka the Wolverine android, that they've somehow managed to reprogram, weaponize, and sent against the other mutants. Yes, because if the giant killer Stark Sentinels weren't bad enough, let's also throw in an evil killer Wolverine robot with a Terminator eye just for good measure. This turn of events could easily have spelt curtains for Gambit and his team, but thankfully it's at that very moment the Goblin Queen, HAVOK, and her own Dark X-Men team show up to reinforce them. MADELYNE also seems to be having way too much fun doing what is essentially her own version of "To Me, My X-Men." This new coalition of mutants ends up taking the fight directly to the Orchis grunts and cuts through them like a knife through wet paper. It's here though that Alex of all people actually ends up bringing something really interesting up. He basically says, hey, we're supposed to be the heroes, right? We sure are killing pretty damn indiscriminately right now. If we keep this up, won't we just be confirming every horrible thing that Orchis has been saying about mutants being dangerous since the very beginning? Naturally, MADELYNE and the others don't want to hear any of that right now. As far as they're concerned, they'll have a moral debate when they're not staring down the barrel of full-on genocide. I just find it really interesting that in what is supposed to be the darker, edgier X-Men book, HAVOK actually ends up being the heart of the team who wants the mutants to stick to their original ideals. With Azazel's help, this new ragtag team of mutants is able to escape from trouble. Unfortunately, poor Archangel ended up getting stabbed by Albert in the fight and gets left behind. Which, considering how powerful he is, that seems like a bad idea. Maybe you should have waited a couple minutes. Either way, his body gets snatched up and taken back to Orchis HQ, where we see a group of mad scientists already chomping at the bit to do some crazy evil experiments on him, but he's not their only mutant test subject either, as they have another ace in the hole that they cannot wait to turn loose. I'm talking about the Goblin Queen. No, not the Madeline Pryor we know, the Madeline Pryor of Earth 91240. The one who first appeared in 2015's Secret Wars, the one who was the leader of the Hexmen team. Now, believe it or not, that's actually where the main story ends, but this is an extra-length 36-page book, and we actually get treated to a whole other backup story that changes tones completely, becoming a straight-up workplace comedy focusing on Havok trying to keep the Limbo Embassy together while also maintaining his relationship with Madeline and all the crazy mutants who come through their door looking for asylum. Again, it's very funny and reads like a completely different book. I wonder if these backups are going to be a thing moving forward, because if so, I'd enjoy that. Hell, even Ben Reilly Chasm shows up for a second just to poke holes in how stupid that dark web event is and to remind us that he still exists and is still a prisoner of the embassy. And so that was Dark X-Men issue number 1, everybody, and I'll fully admit I didn't know what to expect going into this book. Heck, I've never actually read anything by Steve Fox before. I know he has a background in horror and has some popular indie series, and he certainly does bring that sort of unique flair to this team book here, focusing on the weirder, grosser mutants, the ones that say that they couldn't even get along on Krakoa given their second chance. I will say though, it's weird that this one gets painted with the Dark X-Men title, wherein if you've read Immortal X-Men and the main X-Men book, and basically any book that's come out during the Fall of X line so far, they've all been pretty dark. Kitty's killing people now, Psylocke is killing people now with real swords, so to see Goblin Queen and some of her folks killing people, it's not nearly as shocking. That's still not to say I didn't have a lot of fun with the book. It's nice to see them actually continue Madeline Pryor's turn to the good side, especially now when the chips are down. And you really need all hands on deck. Someone like Madeline could be a real game changer, especially because there's no Jean in the world right now. Yeah, I know there's gonna be a Jean Grey book coming out like next week, but still. My favorite part of all of this is actually probably Havok himself. He's had such an interesting journey throughout this Hawks and Pox Hickman era of X-Men. And perhaps the best, biggest compliment I can give this book is that Alex in this story really does feel like an organic continuation of everything that was going on with him at the end of Hellions. And there's a kind of hilarious, dark irony that Havok could only be happy and get everything he wanted in a world wherein the mutants' beloved nation fell and a bunch of them are being hunted and on the run now like never before. I feel comfortable giving this one a 7.5 out of 10. It didn't totally blow my mind out of the gate, but it certainly shows a lot of potential, and I'll definitely be checking back to see what they do in the future. Hey there everyone, it's your old pal Cape Joel again, thanking you so much for watching to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, why not check out my Amazon link down in the description. Yes, that's right, the Cape Joel channel officially has its own Amazon storefront now. You can pick up a comic or anything else for that matter, and if you did, you'd really be helping me in the channel. So with that out of the way everyone, I will see you again next time. Bye-bye.